Good morning. I'm Chaplain Rick Etter, one of the Loudoun County Fire Rescue Chaplains, and I would like to welcome you to today's service for Brother Chilcoat. Today's service is a time for three things: grieving, thanksgiving, and hope. And our words today will reflect these three important elements. It is a time of grieving and mourning the loss of Brother Irv. It is also a time for thanksgiving, for there is much to celebrate in Irv's life. It is also a time of hope. The Apostle Paul writes that in our grief, we should not be like those who do not have hope. For Christ has gone before us and opened a way for us all to live in eternity. Bow your heads. Dear Lord, we ask for your blanket of comfort around Irv's family today as we gather to honor, remember, and mostly as we celebrate his life. The loss of a loved one is one of the most difficult events in our lives, and we pray that today's service shines a light on Irv's life as a husband, father, and grandfather. We ask, Lord, that as we move forward with our lives, that you will keep Irv planted in our hearts, and as we think of him often, his memory will always bring a smile to our face. We ask in your name, amen. We're going to start off with several scriptures that I thought would be appropriate, especially for Irv. John 14, verse 1 through 3. Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God. Believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you with me, that you also may be where I am. Romans 6, verse 4. We were buried therefore with him by baptism into death, so that as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, we too might walk in newness of life. And finally, John 11, and Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. Whosoever that believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Okay, at this time, I'm going to have Tyler and Matt Dye come up as they have a poetry selection.
Okay, well, I told myself I'd be composed coming up here to speak today, but I think, to be honest, it went out the window as soon as I walked in through those doors. But might need a little bit of patience and some help with everybody. I'll try and get through this as I can. For those that we have not had the opportunity to meet yet, I am Matt Dye, and this is my brother Tyler. And although we don't carry the Chilcoat name, we're the proud sons of Irv Curly Lee Chilcoat. To be honest, we felt compelled to come up here and say a few words for a great man that did a lot for us. And I told my brother, I said, okay, if you're going to come up here and you'll have a poem to read, I said, I guess I'll come up with something that's appropriate. I won't embarrass the family, Mom. And I'll try and give honor to Curly. And as I try to put some thoughts together, it gave me an opportunity to reminisce. I laughed about a lot, I cried, but most importantly, I think it's another opportunity to speak to Curly again, to give him thanks, and to share just a fraction of the impact he had. But first, I want to thank all the friends, family, fire service brothers and sisters that are here joining us today. I can't even say the condolences, the outreach and support that you've given to my mother and our family in the last few weeks has been overwhelming, and we cannot thank you enough. I always knew Curly had made a name for himself, and his career was pretty impactful. We'd seen his burnt helmets in the basement and all of the awards that he had accumulated over his career. But to be honest, I never understood the true scale of his work. I always saw his big old bald head and Fu Manchu mustache that he rocked for so many years. I thought that was what made him remembered. I'm sure for some there was other reasons. But after looking at how many have joined us today and reading and hearing of all the stories that have been shared with us since his passing, I come to know that Irv Chilcoat is a name that many have come to know and respect. For some 30 years, it seems, he helped raise my brother and I. As our relationship grew over the years, I certainly called him a whole lot of things. At first, I told him that he wasn't my dad. That was the typical response for somebody new coming into the family. His nickname Curly stuck. Eventually, I accepted him as stepdad. And not until his final days here with us, at his bedside, my brother Tyler and I, we called him Dad. And he mustered enough energy to tell us how good it was to hear that. I called him Dad because he taught me things. He introduced me to things. He gave me a lot of life lessons, many of which I did not have an opportunity to understand until later in life, until my time in the Army. He taught me a lot. Taught me how to play baseball, his little league coach. Taught me how to drive stick shift manual in the Cascades Firehouse parking lot, as a matter of fact. Yet he was not one to ever get frustrated, but my gosh, he showed patience with me that day as I tried to figure out that clutch. And I just gave him a violent thrashing and shaking for an hour, it seemed. But I just remember him laughing hysterically, and that was Curly. He also taught me about selfless service. Specifically, McGruff Camp in the early 90s comes to mind. My brother and I, we volunteered for numerous McGruff Camp events, and to be honest, we were voluntold. Turley told us to go, and we didn't have a chance to even change his mind, so we were kind of forced to. We complained about it. We even skipped my great friend Edwin Moreno in the back here. We skipped his birthday one year at Kings Dominion. But looking back at it, I understand that some professions require you to don a uniform, a patch, or a badge, and with that comes a sense of pride. And with that comes a sacrifice of self for the betterment of others. And I'm thankful to have had one small part in a long career dedicated to the service of others. By the way, it's been, 25, 30 years since we skipped Edwin's birthday at Kings Dominion that year, and he still, to this day, every year, reminds us, are you going to come to my birthday, or are you going to skip it for McGruff Camp? So Edwin, those annual reminders will carry a special meaning for the years ahead. He introduced me to a lot. My gosh, he introduced me to a lot. One of the first things he introduced me to was Firehouse Chili. Firehouse Chili about 2-3 times a week, it seemed. We got so sick of it. More ways than one. He also introduced me to, sorry, Mom, the repercussions of eating Firehouse Chili. How to politely excuse myself from a room. And this naturally led to Curly introducing us to the jingle, Beans, Beans. I think you know how the rest goes. Tampa, St. Pete, Clearwater, he introduced us to. My wife, Sandra, our 2 kids now live in Tampa, and that's something simple that we can owe to Grandpa Curly. Introduced me to the Rays, Tropicana Field for the first time. That's something I finally remember, and I'm thankful for, because about 30 years later, it seems, I was able to share the same experience and story with my 2 kids. He introduced me to the brotherhood, what it means to serve, the lifelong relationships that you'll carry with you, even up until your day of days. And I came to hear of and know some of those brothers that we served with. Gentlemen like Mark Featherstone, Tommy Owens, Rodney Crone, Mr. Charlie Grant, Marvin, Matt Murphy, Rob Leeper, Keith Brower, Eddie George, Scott Milligan, and the many others who are all here with us today, helping my mom through the toughest of times. And for that, I thank you, brothers and sisters. You give me life lessons. At times he was tough, Curly was tough. But years later, I would appreciate the discipline he instilled in me. Do things right the first time. You will re-vacuum those steps if they don't look good. Integrity. Do the right thing even when nobody is looking. Here's an important lesson that I've certainly passed off to my kids. Stay off the grass. Pine Sol cleans everything. Take care of your gear, and it will take care of you. And that followed me from him showing us years ago how well maintained the firehouse was. The uniforms, the tanks, the trucks always getting washed at the station. Everything was manicured dress right dress. I grew up with a strong military background and influence on both sides of the family, but it was Curly. Curly taught me to dedicate myself to family and dedicate a life to service. Curly had a lot of successes in his career. I think it was Arlington Recruit Class 1, newspaper articles, Medals of Valor, the Hall of Fame. But it was his biggest accomplishment is how he supported his family and unconditionally loved his wife. His true happiness and his biggest joy was being surrounded by the large family that he helped create. Curly, I can't thank you enough for the impact you've had in our life, for just being there, from teaching us baseball, supporting us through school, getting us through college, letting us move back home after college, sending me off to Iraq. Welcoming our lives to this family, welcoming our children into this world. You're always there. In your last days, you asked me to make a promise, and that promise was to take care of Mom when you're gone. I'll take care of her. I'll make sure she continues to make Firehouse chili. She remains late for most events. She stays off the grass. But in all seriousness, Curly, I'll make sure she's surrounded by the large family that you helped create, and that she remembers you with each fire truck that passes. We thank you for everything you've blessed us with. Please watch over us. Rest easy in the Lord's kingdom. We'll see you again. I love you, Dad.
I want to share a quick poem. It's called The Dash. And you know, it's oftentimes like this when we lose someone we love, a family member, a colleague, a neighbor. And it highlights the harsh reality of just how fragile and temporary our life is here on earth. And this poem's been shared before in our family at my grandmother's funeral, and hopefully this poem will bless everyone here with some self-reflection as it has done so for myself. I read of a man who stood to speak at the funeral of a friend. He referred to the dates on the tombstone from the beginning to the end. He noted that first came the date of birth and spoke of the following date with tears, but he said what mattered most of all was the dash between those years. I rehearsed this a couple times and never cried, and then I get up here. For that dash represents all the time that they spent alive on earth, and now only those who love them know what that little line is worth. For it matters not how much we own, the cars, the house, the cash. What matters is how we live and love and how we spend our dash. So, think about this long and hard. Are there things you'd like to change? For you never know how much time is left that can still be rearranged. If we could just slow down enough to consider what's true and real, and always try to understand the way other people feel, and be less quick to anger and show appreciation more, and love the people in our lives like we've never loved before. And if we treat each other with respect and more often wear a smile, remembering this special dash might only last a little while. So, when your eulogy is being read, with your life's actions to rehash? Would you be proud of the things they say about how you spent your dash? And Irv, Dad, I'm proud to say that you had one heck of a dash.
Next, we'll have Chief Keith Johnson, Loudoun County Fire Rescue, up.
Well, good morning. For those I haven't met, I'm Keith Johnson. I have the honor to be the fire chief here in our Loudoun County Combined Fire and Rescue System. To start off, on behalf of all of our leadership of Loudoun County Fire and Rescue, our combined system, our Board of Supervisors, I think Supervisor Turner from the Ashburn District is here today, our County Administrator Tim Hemstreet. I want to express our sincere sadness with the passing of past Chief and Lieutenant Irvin Lee Chilcoat, or Irv as we all knew him, or now Curly and a lot of other names I got for him too. Our condolences go out to his wife Sandy and the entire Chilcoat family. Let me start off and say, Tyler and Matt, great job. If you ever feel the need to assist in McGruff Camp again, we're all in. We just finished it last week, so I'm sorry you weren't there, but all of you are welcome to come back and help. It's a great, great time. You know, today is pretty important, obviously, to celebrate the life of Irv. But as I looked around the room and I stood outside, unbelievable representation by so many leaders of our fire and rescue system here today that helped build this fire and rescue system. And certainly Irv would be here right with us, standing with us today if it was somebody else that was passing. And thank you for all that came. Again, there is a lot of fire service leaders here that have helped mentor me and have been role models for me in the past, but I'm sure we could add Irv right in that group and he would be with us today. So I'm honored to be here and honored to speak for a few minutes. When I was thinking of what I could say in a short amount of time about a man that has dedicated his life to public safety, and more importantly, to training of others, I've heard just in the time I've been here this morning, and I'm sure we'll hear it today, that Irv taught half the people in this room, you know, that taught him the fire service journey. We don't learn from textbooks, we get knowledge from textbooks, but it's through experience and others teaching us hands-on skills that really makes us good firefighters and EMS professionals. But what came to mind was lifelong service, right? That's what came to mind for me. Service, in a sense, is defined as the duty or work of public servants or the performance of any duties and work for another. Certainly Irv was someone who dedicated his life, starting in the Virginia Army National Guard, and then later as a firefighter, volunteer, and then career member of multiple departments, as I'm sure you'll hear from with the eulogy. Irv's fire service career spent 31 years centered around caring for others. That's what we do as firefighters and EMS professionals. We care for others. Irv, as you know, began with Arlington County, went to Roanoke, and then ultimately became a career firefighter with Loudoun County Fire and Rescue, where he spent his time as a lieutenant. One of the special things that I learned about Irv was Irv in his retirement worked for the Loudoun County Public School System as the Monroe Tech High School campus worked teaching young folks that are coming up into the system. And I wish Irv was still here because I'd hire him back. We have a vacancy right now, and I'd be happy to hire him back to teach that program. Irv was, as we know, was a charter member of the IFF Local 3756. And in 1988, he received the Silver Medal of Valor and was introduced into the Loudoun County Hall of Fame. Two great honors. I'm sure Irv, as the local now, is moving on to collective bargaining. I'm sure Irv was smiling about that as they begin a new chapter in their local career. Well, I have not known Irv as long as many of you, right? But what I can tell you, my time spent speaking with Irv has been an absolute pleasure. I found Irv to be a dedicated public safety professional and someone who had a passion, an absolute passion for the fire service, and especially the teaching of others. Since coming to Loudoun County, Irv has been a big supporter of mine. I came here 8.5 years ago, and Irv immediately reached out to me and was an ultimate supporter of me, then as an assistant chief and now as the fire chief. He always wanted to ensure that I was on the right track and that I was absolutely taking care of the troops. And if he heard that I wasn't, I'm pretty sure that he would tell me otherwise. As a matter of fact, I guarantee he would tell me otherwise. To demonstrate his commitment to me and to making sure I was doing the right thing as chief, shortly after becoming chief, a package arrived for me in the mail at the office. It was an HO diesel engine train. Specifically, it was the Long Island diesel engine number 254. You see, Irv knew that I came to Northern Virginia in 1983 as a young kid from Long Island, where I grew up, and that's where I started my fire service journey. Irv wanted me to know that if I didn't do my job and take care of the troops, I could take that train right back to Long Island where I came from. That train sits on display in my office every day, and people, why does the fire chief have a train in his office? And I love to tell the story. But it's right there in my office, Irv, and you see, it's a reminder to me, and we probably all need reminders like that to make sure we're keeping on track and doing the right thing. While our history of fire and EMS service in Loudoun County is deep and rich, starting with all of our volunteer companies and volunteer agencies, as a system, we're fairly new. So I often ask myself, for what or whom do we all owe success that we all have proudly achieved today in Loudoun County? While the list of names is long, and often we rehearse this at funerals, Irv Chilcoat is certainly one of those members that we can contribute to our success. His passion, his commitment to the fire service, his desire to see that all of you were taken care of was so obvious to me. The loss of Irv and many others that helped forge our history is a loss that we can never recover from. It has been an honor to know Irv, and many of us would not be here today without past providers, teachers, mentors, leaders, and friends like Irv Chilcoat, paving the way for us to be so successful and to follow. Again, on behalf of our county administrator, our board of supervisors, and all of us that wear a uniform, thank you, Irv, for all that you have done for us, for your commitment and your dedication to fire and rescue system here in Loudoun County. We will never forget you.
Mr. Welch will now perform some music for us. Mr. Welch.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeff Welsh, and my family have known Sandy and Irv I've known him over half my life. And he always used to joke with me saying, hey, you gonna sing Ave Maria at my funeral? I mean, we're talking like 20 years, 10 years. He's like, hey, you gonna sing Ave Maria at my funeral? Sure, Irv, yeah, no problem. So, I guess here you go, Irv. All right.
Maria gratia plena, Ave, Ave Dominus, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Ave Maria.
Last week, our senior chaplain had called me up and asked if I would read some scripture at the service today, and he was doing the service. And I said, fine, no problem. I'll pick some out and we'll be good. Thursday morning, I get a phone call from said chaplain. I have some bad news. I just tested positive for COVID. And I'm like, okay. And he said, I'm going to call Mark and I'm going to call Sandy and we'll figure out what we're going to do. Okay, no problem. Get a call back that afternoon from Jim. I asked him how he's doing. He said, felt like I lost a fight. Said, okay, so what's going on? And he hesitates and he said, well, I'm not sure how to tell you this. And so I'm sitting there waiting for the other shoe to drop. And he said, you have to do the whole service. And so I spent the next 36 hours frantically running around because I had to write all my stuff because Jim did everything extemporaneously. He could stand up here and he could rattle off prayers and he could rattle off everything else just right out of his head. I can't do that. So I was frantically running around trying to figure out what I was going to say. And I met with Sandy and Tyler and Matt yesterday afternoon. And so we talked and shared some stories and everything. And I found out a little bit more about Irv that I sort of knew before, but nothing ever confirmed it. Irv was a very multifaceted individual. That was the best word I could come up with. He could be a hard taskmaster in the firehouse, on the training pad, at home, as Tyler and Matt found out when they were supposed to vacuum the stairs. But the thing about Irv was he could be dressing you down 1 minute, and the next minute he was your biggest cheerleader. And I also heard a rumor that I have been unable to confirm. You would have to talk to the family about this, that Irv was a teddy bear. Now understand, Irv did not look like, Irv looked like in another time he would have been mafia muscle. The bald head, the big stash. The rest of us on the training pad envied that stash. And try as hard as we could, none of us could really get to that. The closest anybody I've seen in Loudoun County come to that would be Jeff Flippo. So, Irv would cajole you, he would harangue you, he would yell at you. But if he didn't do any of these things to you, you knew you were in trouble. Because if Irv liked you or loved you, he would do all of those things to you. If he didn't speak to you, or he avoided you, or only spoke to you if he absolutely had to, you knew you were not on his Christmas card list. On the training pad, Irv had one absolute rule. Rule number one was you do not hurt your instructors. And he had some people who made some stupid mistakes, and he was on them in a flash. And one day, at a training burn, we had been burning all day. It was a long day. The instructors were worn out. Went in on one student burn, and a student forgot to set his nozzle pattern. And he hit the fire, blew the fire back over the interior instructors. And, oh, I forgot to mention that instructor was me. And I came bailing out of the building. This was the old burn building up at the training center, not that new Lego building. But I came bailing out, and I'm running across the pad, and I'm pulling my gear off because the steam under my gear is burning me. And I go over and I grab one of the water jugs and put it up over my head and pour it over my head. And Irv comes running over. And Irv, being Irv, I'm trying to get my shirt off. It's hard to raise my arms up, take my shirt off because it hurts. So he helps me take my shirt off, and then he claps me on the back. He says, "Does that hurt?" And I looked at him, I said, "You think?" As the blisters are starting to appear on my shoulders. And he said, "What happened?" I said, "Well, this is the nozzle man messed up." He said, "Okay, where are they?" And a couple of the other, Jimmy Kaiser, JB were standing there. And he turns around and he says, "Where are they?" And I said, "It's that group over there." And as he turns and he starts striding towards them, Jimmy says, "Chief, don't hurt them." And these kids, they're sitting there, right? And they look terrified. Because first they knew they hurt an instructor, and second, Irv was walking their way. Irv goes up and he says, "Which one's the nozzle man?" And one voice. And Irv goes like this. And he takes the young man over to the hose line. And he goes through with him, step by step, exactly what he did. And then he starts, it becomes a teaching moment. And after about 10 minutes, he's done. And he comes back to us and said, "No problem." Said, "He's got it down." And that was the way Irv was. Now, if you made the same mistake twice, okay, that could be a problem. But that was Irv. And he lived his life helping others. A lot of us, when we come into this career, we do it, it's because it's a calling. You know, people don't just necessarily wake up in the morning and say, "Hey, I'm going to go be a firefighter." And Irv did that. He helped people. You have no idea how many people he helped. even people sitting in here, you have no idea how many people you have helped over your career. And at some point in your career, you realize that, first of all, you're no longer invulnerable. You first come into the fire service, run into that burning building, no problem, okay? You go into the building, crawl under that wrecked car, jump down into that ditch, whatever. And as you get a little older, you gain a little bit of wisdom, and you realize that, okay, we're going to walk into that burning building instead of just charge headlong into it. And then at some point in your life, you come to terms with your own mortality. You get to a point in your life when you realize the end is a lot closer than the beginning. And Irv lived a life of service to others. And in the end, Irv, he never wore his religion on his sleeve, but if you knew him, you knew he had faith. But towards the end, he decided that he wanted to be baptized again. And so, at the hospice where he was, his son baptized him again. And the story of that is almost typical Irv. At the chapel there, they didn't have any baptismal font or anything. So the chaplain said, let me go see what I can find. Comes back with a bottle of Dasani water and a Reese's Pieces container. And that's how he was baptized. So in the end, Irv became one with Christ, and he is overhead now watching down on us. And I'm really surprised I got through that. So okay, next up, Chief Tommy Owens from Winchester is going to give a eulogy for Irv.
It's a sad day, but look outside at this glorious morning that we have to celebrate the life of a man who, over the course of his life, touched the lives of so many others and had a tremendous influence on the fire rescue service in Loudoun County and across the Commonwealth of Virginia. I listened to Matt and Tyler, and brothers, Irv taught me how to drive a stick shift fire truck, so I feel your pain on the driving lesson, believe me. Irv was born in Washington, D.C. on Christmas Eve. Who in the world would imagine that kind of present showing up for the rest of us on the eve of the birth of our father in 1939? Moved to Tidewater, Virginia from Washington, D.C. when he was 12 years old. And now, as Irv puts it, he graduated from high school in the top 1,000 of his 1,100-person class. He served in the U.S. Army Reserves for 6 years, and he worked as a welder in the Newport News shipyard. Irv had a short marriage while he was in Newport News, his first wife, Faye, and from that marriage came his daughter, Helen Jean, who blessed Irv with 2 granddaughters, Amanda and Erin. With his longtime companion Annette came his daughter Cynthia, who gave him granddaughters Tabitha and Monica. And Irv also helped raise Annette's stepson, Timothy Register. Irv married his loving wife, Sandra Dye Chilcoat, in 1997 and helped her raise her sons, Matthew and Tyler Dye. As Sandy knows, Irv started communicating with me quite some time ago about the kind of service he wanted when his time came. He wrote notes. He wrote stacks of notes. He wrote many different notes, very detailed notes, lots and lots of notes to help me prepare for his service. But in every one of them, there was a constant theme. Every one of his notes spoke of the love for his family, his blended family, and his love for Sandy. Sandy Irv told me many times, "You're the best thing that ever happened to him." When Irv left Newport News, he moved to Arlington, and he applied to be a police officer. In this life, can anybody in this room imagine Irv Chilcoat as a cop? Fortunately for all of us, the personnel department of Arlington County called Irv and said the fire department was hiring. Did he have any interest in applying? And Irv said, well, sure. He didn't know anything about the fire. I mean, he sees the red trucks like the rest of us, but never had a thought in his mind. But he was hired by Arlington County in 1962. Irv was also a founding member of the Sterling Park Volunteer Fire Company, which formed in 1966. And over his many years of service with Sterling, Irv held every operational line position, including fire chief. Irv left Arlington in 1974 when he was appointed fire chief in Roanoke County, Virginia. And I'll have a little more to talk about that later. His career then brought him back to Northern Virginia, where he served as the lieutenant and training officer for the city of Manassas Park Fire Department until he was hired as a firefighter by Sterling Park Volunteer Fire Company. And after Loudoun County assumed responsibility for the career staff in Sterling, Irv was promoted to lieutenant with Loudoun County Fire Rescue. Irv was also very proud of being a founding member of Loudoun Career Firefighters Association, IAFF Local 3756. And Irv retired from the fire service in 1992. During Irv's career, he received many citations for outstanding performance at emergency incidents. He was a recipient of Loudoun County's John C. Carr Fire Instructor of the Year Award and often told me that is the recognition he was most proud of. He was inducted into the Loudoun County Fire Rescue Hall of Fame in 2013. In 1988, Irv received the Loudoun County Chamber of Commerce Silver Medal of Valor for life-saving actions after an explosion and significant hazmat incident at the Automata facility on Sully Road. Now, footnote to that incident, Irv was scrubbed down on the scene to decontaminate him after his exposure to the chemicals and sent to the hospital for evaluation. When he returned to the scene 5 hours later, a Fox News reporter asked him what it was like handling the incident. And in true Irv Chilcoat style, he replied, well, 5 hours ago I had hair. I know Captain Mike Richardson is here, retired battalion chief, Captain to Irv. Mike, in his notes, he specifically wanted me to communicate to you this morning his appreciation for you as his supervisor, as a friend, and the leadership that you provided during his service as his company officer. And in true Irv form, in his notes, he said, back then with Mike, we were able to do with a 3-man engine what it now takes 5 engines, 2 ladder trucks, a rescue squad, and a herd of chiefs and safety officers to do today. As has been commented on, there were so many dimensions to Irv Chilcoat's personality. He was unbelievable. You never knew what Irv was going to show up next. He could be the kindest, most caring soul, and 5 minutes later be the biggest ass on the planet. He had the most warped sense of humor of any human being I've ever encountered. He was a total prankster, but he could be very demanding, impatient, hard-nosed, very critical. And for some reason, he always kept the phone number for Ashcraft and Jarrell in his pocket, his favorite law firm. Irv had a style that was truly his own. I always felt like he was our version of Broadway Joe Namath. He had that kind of swagger and confidence in everything he did. Irv Chilcoat was just that guy, and you could not help but love him. Several years ago, when Irv knew his health was in decline, he started being very open about the kind of service that he wanted. And Irv asked me if I would deliver his eulogy, but he was very clear. I just want you to tell all the stories and make it fun. So let me grab the notes Irv sent me of all his stories. It's, well, I boiled it down to a couple pages, but did I mention that he sent lots of notes? Lots of notes. Now, I'm in a church, and I'll probably be struck down by lightning after this. And if anyone gets offended, I apologize in advance. But I'm going to tell Irv's stories just as he asked. So folks, settle in. Because I am about to deliver the sermon from the book of Irv. As a firefighter, Irv was as laid back as they came. Marvin Miller tells me the story of Irv getting jammed up with the operations chief in Arlington County when he worked down there because he saw Irv driving the back of the tiller ladder truck with his feet up on the windshield and wearing a crocheted beer can hat. Certainly not the uniform of the day. He received a good chewing out for that one, but as the story continues to go in Arlington, that was just one of many. Speaking of his time in Arlington, I can remember Sterling being out on an overnight working fire, and Irv was supposed to be at work the next morning. Well, again, in true Irv fashion, he walks over to the engine, he picks up the mic to the regional fire mutual aid radio, he calls the Arlington County dispatcher and calls in sick. All of the engines that Irv sold to Sterling, he used to be a fire truck salesman for one of his side gigs. Well, they had these red marker lights that went all the way around the perimeter of the vehicle. And, you know, when you turn the headlights on, the lights come on. Well, that was kind of boring to Irv, so he put them on a flasher. Irv loved them flashing lights. And that was okay. But it turns out that's illegal in Virginia. And they earned him and Wayne Preddy a ticket on the way back from the Colonial Beach Parade. And those same pumpers, the exhaust systems were set up without mufflers. Irv loved the sound of those straight pipes. One year while we were returning from the Winchester Firefighters Parade, Irv intentionally revved up the engine and let off the gas in downtown Middleburg at 11:30 at night. The citizen complaints were so bad, the company received a letter from the Middleburg mayor, banning us from driving through town unless we were on an emergency response. So Irv just switched to doing it in Leesburg. The year Irv was chief in Sterling, he had a standing policy that when the engine arrived on the scene, the crew would stay on the back step of the engine until the officer came around to tell you what he wanted you to do. Now, I never saw Irv get excited at a fire until the day we had the fire at the old mill on Ruatan Road in Old Sterling. When the engine turned onto Ruatan Road, the old mill was burning. The old hotel across the street was burning. The power poles and the power lines were burning, and the asphalt on the road was burning. So we had fire to the left of us, fire to the right of us, we had fire above us, fire below us. Irv comes running around the back of the truck, and there we were, 4 of us, we were just standing there. Irv lost his mind. He starts ranting and screaming, "What are you doing just standing there?" And we just calmly said, "Well, Chief, we're just following your orders." That policy was rescinded the day after that fire. But that's the only time I ever saw Irv get excited. Now, I mentioned Irv served as a fire chief in Roanoke County. And when he leaves Arlington, he takes his vast Northern Virginia knowledge and experience down there, and he brought more contemporary fire rescue policies and procedures. He improved their training. And he set about the process of improving their fleet. The politics, as Irv would put it, got the best of him. See, Irv had ruffled some feathers of some of the longtime volunteers with his policy changers. And to modernize their fleet, Irv bought 2 fully custom engine tankers from Pennsylvania-based Hahn Fire Apparatus. A perfectly legal, competitive bid process. However, when you're the fire chief in the county where they build Orrin fire apparatus, you don't buy Hahn fire trucks. So election season for the Board of Supervisors rolls around, and between the volunteers that he had upset and the Orrin fire truck folks that he had upset, they put a lot of money and political support into the campaigns of candidates that had agreed they would replace the fire chief. And that's what happened. But as the Chilcoat luck would have it, it turns out the meeting that the supervisors took their action was illegal under Virginia law. So Irv reached in his pocket and pulled out the phone number for Ashcraft and Jarrell. Irv left Roanoke with a handsome settlement and the last laugh. In fact, the judge even asked him if he wanted his job back. And Irv's answer was hell no. So. Irv had side hustles. Irv was a painter that could paint an entire house with 3 gallons of Duron paint because he would water it down so bad it's almost transparent when it went on the wall. He drove charter buses. Drove buses for Greyhound and Virginia Coach bus lines up in Percival. And if you ever made the mistake of calling Irv a bus driver, he would immediately announce to the world, "I am not a bus driver, I am a professional motor coach operator." During his motor coach operator days, Irv learned the CB radio language. He was hilarious. So anytime we traveled to an instructor conference, Irv would bring his CB radio and hook it up in the county car, and he's on that thing all the way down the road. Some of those long trips to Memphis, my God, he's talking them up. Now, Irv had the ability to create this very soft, lispy voice that made him sound like his version of a feminine man. And he would mess with these big burly truck drivers all the way down the interstate, telling them how sweet they were, asking if they wanted to meet at the next truck stop. These truckers would get fired up on that radio, and at some point somebody would get along the line and ask him what his handle was. And Irv would say, "Well, they call me super glue because when I stick you, you stay stuck." Can anybody here imagine Irv Chilcoat as a cop? Now, Irv liked to swim. He used to go over to the Dulles Holiday Inn. He finagled his way in there to use the pool or something, and the sauna. And, I mean, it was a regular thing. Anytime he was off at some point, he was swimming at the Dulles Holiday Inn pool. One day I heard he had a new gig. He'd become the lifeguard at the Dulles Holiday Inn swimming pool. So I asked him one day, I said, "What is this with you working there?" He said, "Well, I figured out that's where all the flight attendants stay when they have a layover." Irv said he'd never seen so many stewardesses that couldn't swim. He was always having to jump in to save them. And he said the funny thing is most of the time these women didn't even know they was drowning, but he was a professional, highly trained lifeguard, and he knew. Irv was the perpetual prankster. He loved his illegal fireworks. That was always a big thing. And any time of the year, no matter where you were, what you were doing, he could probably produce firecrackers, bottle rockets, all kinds of things that launch in the air. And he had the best times when he would throw firecrackers or launch bottle rockets in a training burn building on the crews as they were trying to go in there and learn how to put these fires out. And for some reason, he always seemed to have a rubber rattlesnake in his truck with him wherever he went. Joe Martin's not here, but he would probably be running out the door right now if I told that story. When Irv was selling Ward LaFrance fire apparatus, he took 3 of us junior firefighters from Sterling with him on a trip to Elmira, New York. We stayed in a flea bag roadside motel, 2 beds and a cot. Around 6 a.m., Irv wakes 2 of us up. And he says, "Watch this." He takes a juicy Vienna sausage out of the can that he had, and he walks over to the poor young man on the cot, and starts rubbing that sausage around. You know what I'm saying? When the young man wakes up, Irv is standing over him in his BVDs with his hand sort of strategically located, if you know what I mean. I never seen this young man move so fast in my life, but he was out. You know, Irv's a fire instructor, was a great fire instructor. But you got to hear the story of how he got his state certification to administer the certification examinations around the state. When the state adopted the National Professional Qualification Standards for firefighters, they needed to train a select group of state instructors as test supervisors to administer the tests. I was selected to attend, and it was a weekend certification training in Blacksburg at Virginia Tech. Irv was unemployed at the time, so he just said, "Mind if I ride along?" "Sure, Irv, jump on in. Bring your CB radio." We stayed in the door room. Irv's plan was he'd just hang out during the day while I was in class, and then we'd go out and party at night. On Sunday, he said he'd put our bags in the car and meet me in the lobby of the auditorium when the class was finished. Well, Irv got down there was a table with a fire program secretary issuing certification paperwork and certificates. So Irv went over to get his. When she told him he was not on the list, Irv went into this whole act about how there had to be a foul up. He came all this way, sat in class for 2 days, and I'm not being certified. Secretary quickly apologized, took all of Irv's instructor information, added him to the list, and issued his certification right there on the spot. Irv has not attended 1 minute of the training class for the whole weekend. So I'm sorry to inform those of you that are here that might have received a test from Irv Chilcoat, your examination is invalid. So, Chief, you might want to start writing names down over here. Okay, now the rest of this gets a little dicey. But since we've already heard about Firehouse Chili, I have to talk about how Irv's flatulence was legendary. When it came to farts, Irv was an artist. Sorry, Charlie. Irv could produce a wide variety of farts. From those silent smokers to those loud, boisterous eruptions almost at will. Irv even created special diets so that he could produce a wide variety of aromas. On poker nights back in the old barn, you learned very quickly that if Irv suddenly got up and left the room, you needed to immediately evacuate the building. And when Irv knew he was going to be traveling for training or meeting with groups of firemen, he would begin to prepare for the trip days in advance, consuming a significant quantity of his famous homemade pickled eggs. Believe me, all across Virginia and in several states, many a young lad has fallen victim to Irv's pickled egg-fueled flatulence. In fact, one of his greatest moments was during the trip home from the test supervisor training I mentioned. We're on Interstate 81, driving northbound, and he let go with one of his most legendary volumes of aroma I've ever experienced. Instantly eye-watering. I'm doing 75. We've got all the windows down in the car. It's doing no good. It was so bad we had to stop. I pulled in the rest area. When we got out, we left the windows down and the car doors open. After we finished using the facilities and come back out, there's a nice couple that had pulled in next to us, and the woman gets out of the car and she immediately looks at her husband and says, "What is that god-awful smell?" Irv had a way of making them linger, that's all. Irv loved trains. Some of you know about that hobby. He certainly given the fire chief a ride out of town, so. He loved trains and train travel. When I worked in Frederick County, Virginia, I got a call from Irv asking me if it was any way possible I could arrange for him to be a judge of the Apple Blossom Firefighters Parade. So I spoke to the parade organizer, and Irv was in. That year, I drove the van that shuttled the judges around the streets of Winchester to inspect the units at their lineup position. The last street full of apparatus ran parallel to the CSX rail yard. I dropped the judges off to walk the line, told them I would pick them up at the end, and we're running late. The whole daggone parade is behind schedule. The judges get back to the van, Irv's missing. So I asked, where is he? The answer is, Irv is driving a locomotive through the rail yard. He said to pick him up at the train station, which was several blocks away. Sure enough, there he was. You could not get the smile off of his face. I said, Irv, we're holding up the entire firefighters parade. What are you doing? He said, I'm fulfilling a lifelong childhood dream. He had driven his train, as he'd always wanted to do. I mentioned the Fire Department Instructors Conference, and Irv and I, together with a lot of folks in this room, Chief Maston from Prince William's been in on these trips, and Alan Colby and Keith Brower, and there's legendary trips to Memphis, Tennessee for this conference. That was his favorite conference city. He loved Elvis Presley, as you can tell by his song selections. So our very first trip to Memphis, he insisted that we go see Graceland just as soon as possible. So Sunday morning we get up, load up, concierge gives us direction, and Irv's driving. Now Irv's got this vision that his hero, Elvis Presley, lives in this stately plantation out in the country somewhere outside of Memphis, Tennessee. And next thing you know, we pass Graceland in the middle of a shopping district right downtown. The stone wall was covered with graffiti and psychedelic paint. The gates were about falling off, and there were homeless people camped on the front sidewalk. Across the street was nothing but a strip center of Elvis memorabilia stores. Turned out that Graceland was in a trashy neighborhood. Irv was distraught over it. His Graceland bubble had burst. Now, Irv was always ahead of his time. Do you know he actually invented the rose ceremony that you see on these bachelor shows? Irv had a favorite gentleman's club in Memphis called the Playhouse 2. And he had a friend in Sterling Park that crocheted full-size roses. Irv would take a dozen with him every time we went. And each night toward the end of the party, if you will, Irv would have a rose ceremony for his favorite dancer. Now you can only imagine some of the criteria he had to make that selection. One year, he made a visit to the same club that could have gotten me fired. There was a political controversy raging in Memphis that year because the city council wanted to raise the age of drink beer from 18 to 21 and keep the under 21-year-olds out of the clubs. It was all over the news. It was national news. It's been picked up by the AP, everything. It's worldwide. We were in my county car, and I'd come down sick with the 24-hour bug. Irv took the keys, loaded up the guys, and they were heading out. I said, Irvin, don't you wreck that car, and when you get to this club, you make sure you park it out of the way. At 11 p.m., I was feeling better. I get up and turned on the local news. The lead story, of course, was the drinking age issue. And I no sooner settled down to watch the story when the news anchor says, we're now switching to a live report from the Playhouse 2. When the picture came on, the reporter was right in front of the club, standing next to my county car on live TV. And I knew Bob Dubé had to be watching back in Leesburg. One year, Irv was between jobs, had very little money, but went along on the Memphis trip anyway. Said he had his Greyhound Union card, and if things really got bad, he'd just jump on the bus and come home. That year, we went with Joe Martin. He was a chief of a federal fire department over in Montgomery County. And the deal was, we'd take my car, so I'd provide the transportation, and Joe had the feds pay for the hotel for the week. Now, at these conferences, the feds have their own conference within the conference. So we actually saw very little of Joe for the entire week. At our hotel, Akron Brass Fire Equipment Company had a hospitality buffet every evening when class was done. Irv would go through the line, make a sandwich to eat, and then he'd make two more and wrap them in a paper towel and take them to the room for breakfast and lunch the next day. Remember, he's broke. The money he had, he needed it for the gentleman's club. Irv lived on corned beef sandwiches and dill pickles the entire week, and he had found a new fuel for his flatulence. This hospitality room was in a hotel parking garage, and there was always this chain across the walkway, which was a direct line into the hotel. It made you go a long way around. Irv was irritated. So one day in the week, there's a crowd of 30, 40 firemen standing in this garage eating their pickles and sandwiches. And Irv walks over to this chain and grabs a hold of it and gives out this and yanks on that thing, and it comes flying. Irv never broke character. Holding that chain in his hand, he turns around to these 30, 40 guys, throws the chain on the ground and just flexes his muscle like that, and turns and walks, and the crowd erupts in applause and roar. And Irv had him fooled because he'd already checked, and the bolt that was holding the chain in was just sitting in the hole, wasn't really connected to anything. But that was Irv. He always had an angle. The last day of that same trip, Joe packs his bag in the morning and says, pick him up right after his last class is finished. As we're ready to check out, Irv walks over to the phone, calls the front desk, and asks to have the manager come to our room. Now I'm a little bewildered, what's up? Manager comes in. Irv goes into his dissatisfied customer mode. And he takes the manager on a tour of our room. We've had no hot water all week, and it's been so bad we've had to visit friends at other hotels in order to shower. The bathroom floor has stayed wet the entire time we've been here, and the leak is so bad the cockroaches in our room been doing a backstroke in the puddle. We've had no towel service. We've had to hang our towels out the window to dry them, so we had towels for the week. There's been no complimentary toiletries, and he needed shampoo. The heat blows cold, the AC blows hot, and I've tried to write a letter home to my family, and there's been no stationery in the desk. Manager is apologizing all over himself and says, when you're ready to check out and you get to the front desk, ask to see me. So at the desk, manager comes out and says, Mr. Martin, because the feds paid for the room, right? So they got Joe's name now. He says, would you be offended if we refunded you half of your room cost for the week? I remember Irv's broke. Irv calmly replies, I think it's reasonable. Irv and I split the $400 cash refund. The best part of the story is when we picked Joe up, he says he spent all his cash for the week, and could we spot him for meals on the drive home? Irv never cracked a smile, says, no problem, Joe, we got you, brother. So those are the stories from the book of Irv, at least the ones that I could tell without getting hit twice by lightning. But there's his list. Quite a man, quite a friend. I was lucky that while Irv was in the hospital, Sandy was able to do a FaceTime with us. It was the last time I spoke to Irv, and I had a chance to tell him I loved him. And that was important. So rest easy, my friend. We will see you on the other side.
At this time, we're going to perform the last alarm ceremony, and after that, we'll have the benediction. And we ask that after the benediction, that everybody please remain seated.
All right, go ahead. I'll call you back.
Attention all companies, stand by for a special announcement. Loudon to all emergency service personnel, on behalf of Loudon County Combined Fire and Rescue, it is with deep sadness and regret that we announce the passing of Lieutenant Irv Chilcoat, retired. Irv started his fire service career in 1966 as one of the founding members of the Sterling Park Volunteer Fire Company. He went on to be a career firefighter with Arlington County, Virginia, then as the fire chief of Roanoke County, Virginia. Irv relocated back to Northern Virginia, where he was hired by Loudon County, where he stayed until retiring as a lieutenant. Irv was awarded the Silver Medal of Valor in 1988. He received the John C. Carr Award in 2015 and later inducted into the Loudon County Fire and Rescue Hall of Fame. Lieutenant Chilcoat, your duties here are done, and your transfer assignment has been completed. Your family, your brothers, your sisters in the fire service, and the citizens of the communities you have served for over 48 years, thank you for the faithful and unwavering service and leadership. We will honor you by continuing to serve with pride and with confidence in knowing you are among our heavenly mutual aid crew, and will help watch out for all firefighters as they respond to emergencies. Irv, job well done. Until we meet again, thank you. And may you rest in peace. Loud and clear, 1137.
Ever changing, but yet is steeped in traditions over 200 years old. One such tradition that holds special significance for firefighters is the sound of the bell. In the past, as firefighters began their tour of duty, it was the bell that signaled the beginning of the day's shift. Throughout the day and night, each alarm was sounded by a bell, which summoned these brave souls to fight fires and place their lives in jeopardy for the good of their fellow citizen. And when the fire was out and the alarm had come to an end, it was the bell that signaled to all the completion of that call. And so, when a firefighter transfers to Heaven's Station, it was the mournful toll of the bell that solemnly announced a comrade's passing. We utilize these traditions as symbols which reflect honor and respect on those who have given so much and who have served so well. To symbolize the devotion that these brave souls had for their duty, a special signal of one ring 3 times represents the end of our comrades' duties and that they will be returning to quarters. And so, to Lieutenant Irv Chilcoat, our comrade, who selflessly devoted his life, I almost made it through, who selflessly devoted his life for the good of his community, his last alarm, he is going home.
We'll now have the benediction from Chaplain Emeritus Charlie Grant.
I'm very thankful to have this opportunity to say just a few words before we give the benediction. We had the joy of marrying Irv and Sandy 30-some years ago. We had the joy of talking with Irv when he wasn't in all those other activities that Tommy Owens told us about. I have a passage in Acts 16, chapter 17, verse 26, tells of how God created us, and He determined beforehand the times and the seasons and the places where we would be. And it's obvious that many here today were at the place and the time to cross paths with Irv. I'm one of the fellows that was on the other side of Irv, the quieter side. We used to sit and talk at the old Station 18 over in Sugarland Run. Nice long talks. I remember going to his house in Mirror Ridge and seeing the train layouts that he put up. I remember going with JB and Irv to watch trains over at Brunswick. I remember talking with Irv on the phone after he was in South Carolina, and as he watched the trains go by, I remember talking with him and praying with him. And what a joy it was to me to hear about Tyler baptizing him a couple of weeks before he passed. If Irv was here today to do it, he would say, folks, there's a saying in the Bible, the Apostle Paul says, this is a saying worthy of all acceptation. Jesus Christ came into this world to save sinners, of whom I am the chiefest. That was Paul's comment. Irv would say, hey, I'm the worst. Yes, Jesus Christ came into this world to save sinners. And one of those was Irv. Let's pray. Father in heaven, I want to personally thank you for the life that you gave Irv, for all that he has done to serve his God and country, especially the community of Sterling. All the different things he did to help train so many. How he was a friend to so many. We especially thank you for how he enjoyed such a long life with Sandy and with his children. I just praise you for all the blessings he's been to so many, family and friends. Father, please help us all to realize we're put here on this earth for a time between the time of birth and the time of death, that dash What we have done, especially for others, is what counts. We thank you that we had the joy of hearing of Irv's profession of faith in your Son, who came into this world for the purpose of paying the penalty for our sins on Calvary's cross. We thank you that Irv knew this and believed this. Now unto him that is able to keep you from falling and to present you faultless before the throne of his grace, to the only wise God, our Father, be honor, glory, majesty, and dominion, now and forevermore. In Jesus' name we pray, with thanksgiving. Amen.
This time, I would like all uniformed personnel and Red Knights to adjourn to the front entrance to set up the processional line. Okay, at this time, everybody else except for family is asked to adjourn to the rear.